Thank you again for inviting me for organizing this very stimulating conference. I will also be talking about a small fraction of my ongoing research on religion in the European Union. And I thought I should present the perspective from which I'm presenting this. I'm a political scientist. I work across sociology and international relations. And this particular piece is located more from the perspective of international relations. That is, it looks at how religion is relevant or has become relevant within the context of the EU, not so much from the perspective of sociology and of therefore societal changes, but more from the institutional perspective and policy processes going on and evolving across the European Union, and in particular in the institutions that are based in Brussels. The research is ongoing, as I said. Partly has been published during the years in 2007, and in particular I have an article here published in 2009, because I'm not sure I can go through everything in these 10-15 minutes. And also this research is part of ongoing research that I'm conducting partly individually and partly in collaboration with my colleagues at the Von Ugel Institute, which is one of the research centers specializing on religion and politics, and has a current program specifically targeting the relationship between religion, public policy, and governance. And you can again see the program of activities here. So this is what the general, basically my conversation now is sort of continuing the conversation started by Javier when he was comparing political systems and constitutional arrangements across the member states of the EU. And I'm specifically looking here, as I said, at the EU dimension, the supranational dimension, what has been happening and what are the implications of what has been happening at the EU level, in particular in relation to the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament, and the legislation and policies that are produced by these institutions. This is the general framework where when I started researching. This is the type of knowledge I had and the type of perspectives that are normally taken when the issue of religion is brought up in relation to discussing the EU. So this is not my perspective. This is what the knowledge I started from. So the general assumption is that Christian values, there is a debate as to whether Christian values were part of the founding elements of the EC institutions back in the 1950s. There is a lot of disagreement around this, but there is also a lot of evidence in that many of the founding fathers were indeed coming from an origins politically rooted in the Christian democratic tradition. Then there is the legal perspective. So there is the ideas perspective of whether Christian democracy and Christian thought and the Christian theology is behind the scenes in the foundations of the initial steps of what are now the EU institutions. And the second perspective is, the laws that regulate these international, regional organizations that are located in what is now the EU, and that is the EU law, the power of the EU law, is very limited, as already we discussed yesterday, in that the competencies about the regulation of how religious freedom is enacted, is implemented, is down to the member states. So the EU institutions have absolutely no say. The only small area in which the EC and the EU now has sort of had a position, but no real power, has been the area of religious freedom and individual rights, in that any country applying, wishing to become a member of the European Union needs to show to be in line and to be implementing the fundamental, conventions for human rights and so on. So what I found, basically, I'm kind of looking at the present and then looking backwards what has happened. What I found looking at recent developments in the course of the years 2000, the first decade of this new millennium, is that actually, and by researching, but also by working very closely with various policy institutions, and also having a chance also to work very closely with the President of the European Commission at some point, I realized that actually religious issues and the religious actors were popping up, were emerging somehow within the institutional structure and within the meetings and policy contexts that were being developed. And yet none of these two factors, these two normal dimensions, were not helping me to understand how that had happened. And then something specifically happened. in the course of the 2000s, we saw the discussion of the so-called Constitution for Europe, which ended up with the production of the Lisbon Treaty, which was implemented in 2009. And again, mentioning something that was discussed yesterday, what was particularly surprising for me and deserving a lot of research was the fact that basically this new treaty that was supposed to condense together and tidy up all the treaties, not only did that, it actually added a new article devoted to the issue of religion and the role of faith-based actors in the European Union. And I found this very changing, very important to study as a political scientist. So the questions that I had, the big question that I had, how comes that with that past, which was contentious in terms of ideological, whether the foundations of the EU are Christian or whether they're more secular, and the fact that the legal framework is very much limiting the possibility of the EU to say or do anything about religion, I was surprised for the emergence of this. So the big question I had, what are the implications of this article for the future development of the EU and the potential influence of the EU in the area of engaging with religion? And then the small questions, sub-questions that I had was, what does this mean for the future, but also how have we ended up in this situation? What are the historical processes, the policy developments or reforms that have allowed us to come to this situation? And which are the political actors involved in this process? Is there any specific individual or group that has been central to reaching this situation? So here is a summary of what I think deserves to be considered when looking at the importance of Article 17. First, it recognizes the contribution of faith communities to the construction of the European Union and to its current life. It's very vague, but it does make this assertion, which is coming through an incorporation of the Amsterdam Declaration that was initially produced in 1997. Second, it's a sort of safeguard, I believe. The primacy of the national level is reiterated, and the EU does not claim to take over any power in the field of regulating religion from the national level. Yet, it is offering some opportunities for faith-based actors, for believers, to engage somehow and bring a contribution to the EU institutional setting. But the caveat is that all this is done deliberately in a very ambiguous manner for a number of reasons, and I believe one of the reasons is probably that the EU policymakers and in particular certain individuals are sort of suspicious of exposing themselves too much in their religious engagement. And secondly, they cannot push the boundaries, the legal boundaries of what the EU can do too much because the national level is the primary one. And what I found is that this is sort of contradicting some of the acquis, because again, the acquis is based on this collaboration between the national level and the supranational level. So what I came out with is, as a definition of how I describe this evolution leading to the Article 17 is a hybrid policy or rather semi-policy framework towards engaging with religion, which we should be careful not to name a proper policy, because a proper policy normally is rooted in a strong legal basis, and a proper policy normally comes with very clear guidelines and mechanism and funding for how to implement this. Whereas this article is there standing a bit in the middle without a strong institutional support and framework, although there is a special unit that is sort of devoted to this, at least as far as the engagement with religion within the domestic context of the EU is concerned. So what I found that were perhaps useful further explanatory dimensions to consider when trying to trace these different factors in terms of actors, in terms of policy processes that may have led to the production of Article 17, I identified three major factors: the endogenous, exogenous, and then the individual actors. And again, if you want to read in detail how I went about methodologically to look at this, what kind of papers, policy documents, documents, how many of them I read, you can find it in the article. So the endogenous dimension, I think, is particularly important because the EU, more than any other international institution, has been evolving very, very fast and has been going through very dramatic transformation in terms, in particular, of its symbolic power. And the shift, in particular, from EC to EU has been a major transformation because the political will and not necessarily the ability to exert the political, but the desire and the wish to engage politically around the world and to project the type of democracy that the EU is about around the world has been very, very important. And many practical transformations have taken place inside in the individual institutions and the policy mechanism for making policies that have led gradually to the opening in general to civil society, to lobbying groups, to the business sector. And in general, again, the EU has promoted the idea of a dialogic relationship with its partners, with its stakeholders, which has a significance in all this. And secondly, the evolution towards from EC to EU has meant a shift from an economic concern to a more moral concern, not only political concern, with foreign policy issues, which is the general thing that is studied if you take a course in European politics. The Maastricht Treaty brought in foreign policy, but actually there is actually a more, as I said, symbolic desire to consider the moral role of the EU in engaging with the rest of the world on the basis of its own values and transposing its values abroad. And this was particularly important when the EU opened up to the member states that were coming from the Cold War, from Central and Eastern European experience of communism, and therefore so the opening up to those that used to be in the communist atheist regime was very important because these countries were able finally to enter the common market, but also to enter a market that was dominated by the ideas of freedom, including freedom of religion, which is very important. Second, exogenous elements that I believe have acted simultaneously, and it's not that one of these factors, I consider one of these factors more important than the others. I believe that they have acted in an interconnected manner. And external events like the end of the Cold War, but also religious and ethnic conflict that have affected Europe and its immediate neighbors in the course of the 1990s, and also other external events like the rise of Islamism across the Middle East, from Iran to various countries in North Africa, the war in Algeria, and also the application for membership on the part of the EU on the part of Turkey. These are all factors that have sort of pushed the member states of the EU to consider the relevance of religion, at least in a foreign policy context that was sort of interconnected with the domestic one. And finally, also 9/11. But like Andrew before, I also believe that the concern of European Union member states, but also in particular the EU institutions with religion, predates 9/11, and there has only been an acceleration of concerns pertaining this after 9/11. But as you can see, the factors are before. Finally, the role of the individual actors. This Article 17 has been produced. Obviously, member states have to agree to the text of what goes into the treaties, but basically some particular actors are to be recognized behind the scenes here. On the one hand, the institutional role of the members, in particular the heads of the European Commission, in particular Mr. Delors at the end of the 1980s, that was sort of presided the shift between the EC to the EU at a particular time also when the Eastern Europe was coming closer to entering the EU project, the project of European integration. And the background of this particular individual is very important because he was a socialist, French, so normally sharing a secularist approach to politics, but then coming from a Christian democratic background that was sort of making him consider the role of religion. And he started opening up informal discussions with inside his cabinet on a private basis initially, and then this was formalized later by his colleagues and successors, to engage with religious leaders, not necessarily to bring back the so-called, the Christian club, but more to discuss in a more critical way what kind of Europe do we want to build now that, the Cold War has ended and so on. So on the one hand, we have the institutional actors and their beliefs, but also on the other hand, the role of faith-based actors should be considered here. So Christian leaders and Christian organizations have actually been active in Brussels or engaged with what was going on politically in Brussels for a long time, basically since the foundation of the EC in the 1950s. But they never managed really to, and I mentioned specifically Christian actors because for the first 30 years of the life of the EC, basically there weren't many other faith-based actors involved in engagement, apart from the German context where Jewish communities were quite prominent. But basically faith-based actors were always there and had particular views. In particular, Christians were favorable towards the project of European integration. Catholics were particularly favorable. But they never really engaged to input too much, give a big input into this political project because of the lack of the resources, but primarily because of the way in which these institutions were developing along a secular liberal path. In a way, the EU institutions, although they're different from the UN, from the World Bank, they were created around the same time as the UN. They were created with the same mindset and the same liberal spirit. So they were supposed to be neutral vis-à-vis religion. So this is the final slide, and it's basically, what do we make then of this Article 17? First, we see that it sort of formalizes these informal connections with faith-based groups of faith ideas. It began with some particular personalities inside the Commission in particular, and now has branched out by engaging and involving all the three major institutions of the EU, the Council, the Parliament, the Commission. Second, this new article opens up a specific path, policy-wise, for faith groups or lobbies to engage in the policy process, but it leaves this open and doesn't clarify the extent to which this contribution, how often or at what level of the institutional level this contribution should be. So what do we make of this? Does this mean then that this opening up, this embryonic policy towards religion, as I call it, has sort of provided a paradigmatic shift? We are going to have a very religious, perhaps very Christian Europe? I don't believe that this is the case, specifically because of the way in which this article has been implemented, and also because of the huge variety socially, in particular in terms of political cultures, that characterizes the different member states of the EU. So there is such a variety of opinions and positions vis-à-vis religion that it's highly unlikely that the EU will at some point completely move up, erode completely the prerogatives of the member states and start making policies. Second, this is only one of the layers in which religion is the only obvious and evident layer of which religion is present in the EU, but it's not the only area in which religion has sort of become an issue in policy making. For instance, you have the people working in the area of anti-discrimination have been engaging very frequently and insistently with the topic of religion. In other sectors of the EU, people working on Mediterranean relations, in particular now in the context of the Arab Spring, units are specifically sort of interested or researching in engaging with faith-based actors or with the role of Islam in particular parts of the world. So this is only basically the showcase, the way for the EU to showcase its engagement with religious issues, but it's not the dominant one. And finally, so what does religion do? Religion, we don't have any evidence to say that to make a causal connection and say that because we have Article 17, then the EU is going to be more religious, more Christian, and then more open to fundamentalism, and that democracy is going to be compromised because of the variety of views. And Also because of the particular dynamics that go on once faith-based actors are involved. There is a lot of competition, there is a lot of games, political games in terms of self-legitimacy, certain institutions or groups inviting certain particular faith groups because there is an agenda there to promote each other and to sort of legitimize each other. So these have nothing to do with the promotion of faith-based ideas. So I finished here, and I leave you basically with this question. So you may disagree with my view, but yeah. You can have a discussion.